From the bonus room. No, got it wrong again. Where'd I put my phone? Because now my phone is binging at me. I don't have it here. It's going to bing all night. From the studio in the bonus room, above the garage, on the north side of Cary, this is the Triangle Talk Show. Hit it. And you folks on YouTube are wondering, hit what? It's the audio folks that know. This will be an audio-centric show. You don't have to be on YouTube to get anything that we're doing here. I'll have a couple of websites, but I'll tell you what they are, so don't worry about it. This is the Triangle Talk Show, episode number 10. I'm putting this in the business category. We haven't done a program in the business category before. I'm calling it Job Interview. Explain in just a moment. This, as I'm recording it, this is Memorial Day, the evening of Memorial Day. It's almost over. I've seen a few people say things like Happy Memorial Day. And I've seen other people say Happy Memorial Day is not really correct. It's a fairly somber holiday. We're celebrating, or we're memorializing our troops who have fallen, who have died in the course of their service. So maybe, and I hope that if you've lost someone, you can celebrate their life and not be, totally distraught about it, although there's certainly going to be a lot of that. But it's not exactly Happy Memorial Day, even though Donald Trump did send a tweet that said Happy Memorial Day and then touted a lot of his accomplishments for his administration, or things he is saying are his accomplishments for his administration. I didn't lose anybody in my family. My mom and dad are veterans. Celebrate them on Veterans Day. But they both survived, at least their military service. Cindy's folks the same. And I'm sure I know people who have lost people in military service. I just don't know that I know them. I don't know that they did. Okay, so we'll get on with the show. Let me get my notes up here. Unusual for me. Basically wrote myself a script for this one. This is a job interview. So I need to do this right. So I spent a lot of time preparing more than just bullet points. Maybe not quite exactly a script. But if you notice that things go a little more smoothly once I start paying attention to the script, you'll see what can be done. But it took like 3 days to get this done. And I don't have really productive days. I think I've got like 3, maybe 4 hours of good productive time in me. I'm old. And so it took a long time to get this all done. Okay, so Triangle Talk Show number 10, the job interview. And for those of you that are watching, you're just going to see me looking over here at my computer screen, reading this thing. It looks like that, or like that, reading over here. So not really much to watch. And I'm not looking at YouTube for notes at this point. So maybe I should just leave this, no, not that shot, this shot up. Oh, no, Cindy. Cindy's gone too. It's just me by myself. Triangle Talk Show number 10, the job interview. Every podcast, every show that I do, that any podcaster does, pretty much any broadcaster does, is basically a job interview in a way. It kind of like my 16-year freelance career. I worked for companies for most of my career, but the last 16 years, from 2001 until I pretty much retired, every time I went and worked for someone, it was like the job interview for the next time I would come work for them. I had to do a good job or they wouldn't hire me again. Essentially, when that job was over, I was fired. And then they called me back to do another job. So every freelance job and every freelancer who does work like that, basically on that basis, you get done with the job you got hired for and you're fired until the next time they call to hire you. This show is just a little bit more overt about it being a job interview. Well, you'll see. So let me begin it this way. My interview with you. Where do you get your news? This is the question you're asking me as I am applying to work for you as your podcaster. This is the question that you are asking me. Where do you get your news, podcaster? And where do you get your context? And how do you make sense of it all? Well, sir or madam, I consume a lot of news from the newspaper, podcasts, TV shows, and it is overwhelming. I can't always make sense of it all. Let me correct that. I don't think I can ever make sense of it all. I'm lucky if I can make sense of some of it. And tomorrow, what I think I made sense of today will probably change. And, it doesn't help that so many of the people and the organizations who either make or report the news, and I'll put that little news in quotes, all of them have an agenda. They're really more interested in generating a smokescreen than they are in telling us what's really happening. So I also pay a lot of attention to where I'm getting my information. Let me give you my daily media list. Now, most mornings, first thing I do is listen to the podcast version of the Rachel Maddow show from the previous night. Yeah, that fits my left-wing filter bubble, I know, but I like it because she's not yelling. It's gentle propaganda. She doesn't have 6 panelists in little boxes all talking at once on the screen. She's really smart, and she rarely, if ever, sounds arrogant, although sometimes her self-deprecation routine sounds a little disingenuous. I really wish that I could trust her to give me a good, well-balanced review of whatever it is that she's covering, but I can't. It's going to be one-sided. It's usually not to the extreme of that side, but it's usually going to be left-leaning. And I listen to the podcast rather than the 9 p.m. live show because, in the evening I'm usually watching, ordinary entertainment TV with Cindy, and she doesn't like the political shows. The broadcast has commercials, and the podcast doesn't, at least not yet. This is the audio podcast that you can get on your phone. I recommend doing it that way. I didn't even used to have cable for MSNBC, so the podcast was all I could get. And now I've got YouTube TV, so I can see and I can record all of the cable news shows. And I'm putting that word record in quotes. Okay, record. I'm putting the word record in quotes. Did that for the video. Because and sometime soon, lost my place here. I'm putting the word record in quotes, and sometime soon I will do a review of YouTube TV, but not now. You might not even have heard of YouTube TV. It's YouTube's version of doing a cable TV subscription. I've tried watching the show in the morning while I was bustling about in the kitchen doing stuff, but YouTube TV made the Rachel Maddow show an on-demand show as opposed to just a recorded show. And that meant it had commercials you can't skip. The YouTube review is coming up, YouTube TV. I'll review it one day, not today. All right. You couldn't skip the commercials anymore. Used to, with a regular recording, you could fast forward through. With an on-demand, you can't. I hate commercials. I am 68. None of them are aimed at me except for the drug ads on the nightly news. So I don't feel bad about skipping them when I can. And I'll bet you never feel bad about skipping commercials, no matter how old you are. And I've got my commercial thing that I've made commercials. I've been the guy that pushed the buttons and made TV commercials for most of my career. So either I should have a lifetime pass to never have to watch another one, or you could argue that that's all I should ever be allowed to watch, just as penance. All right. The podcast version of the show on my phone is way more portable. Watching the TV show on my phone, YouTube TV is also pretty portable. But I really want to be on Wi-Fi because the bandwidth is horrible. It's in my playlist. Easy to get, easy to hear. Leave me alone. It's working for me. And one last point. I almost always listen to the whole show, beginning to end. Rarely bail out early. Got to do something here to my Evernote system, which is trying to feed me very tiny text. And that's part of why it was kind of screwing up before. Okay, that's theory, that's fixed. I miss Bill O'Reilly. Now, I don't know how much of what he did. Let me try this again. I don't know how much he did of what he is accused of. The sexual stuff. Probably a lot. Maybe all of it. Maybe more than we know about. And I am not giving him the benefit of the doubt. Back in the day when he had a podcast, I'd listen to that next after listening to Maddo. He also didn't shout. He also didn't have 6 people in boxes all talking at once. He's also very smart. He was always partisan, more than Maddo. My filter bubble in play probably on that, but I think he was more extreme. But he didn't usually seem that extreme. Now and then he even criticized his own side when they went especially off the rails. He did come across as arrogant a lot. And I know, don't send me email. He still has a podcast. It's behind a paywall. And I'm not going to pay a lot for this muffler. Last I heard, he might get a show on Newsmax. And that cable channel is not on YouTube TV. So I hope it includes the podcast version for free. And wait, what am I saying? I'm not giving him the benefit of the doubt about women. Sorry, Bill. You're off the list. No more Bill. Once in a while, I'll sample Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Fox and Friends, some of the other folks on Fox News. I find them all pretty hard to take. And in future episodes, perhaps I'll go into detail about why. You can probably guess. I always try to read at least some of the News and Observer. And I will admit that I actually skip most stories. It's just time. It's not time. I don't read that fast. I try to read most of the more important stories, at least a few paragraphs. I will usually read all of 1 or 2 stories and all of the comics. If I don't have time for anything else, I'll still read the comics. I check the NNO's website now and then for the more current stuff that's breaking during the day. I do subscribe to the digital edition, and in fact, I read a PDF simulation of the printed paper on an Android tablet. Because on the one hand, I'm old, and I grew up with newspapers, read physical, printed on paper, dead tree newspapers all my life. But on the other hand, I am fairly technically adept, so the PDF version on a tablet makes more sense. I saw the print edition at the Cary train station the other day. I don't see that very often. It seemed really old-fashioned, like big and bulky, but also sadly thin, because the NNO has been cutting back a lot over several years. I was going to claim some advantage to the print layout, even in the PDF version, over a website layout. I don't think that's really true. I think it's just what I'm used to. And I really hope that the NNO survives and eventually thrives again, doing real reporting, digging in deeper and wider than TV stations can, especially exposing political stories that nobody wants to read until they become big scandals. Come on, News and Observer, you can make it. Indie Week, an online website that I check out now and then. It's got progressive political views, entertainment, stuff that I never go see, like plays and theaters and concerts. I would be tempted to go to a concert now and then, but they're all too loud. I don't know. If it's too loud, you're too old. My ears literally buzz. The last concert I went to was at Deepak. It was a guy from the Eagles. My old brain is spacing on his name. Just way too loud. And I've been to a couple of the bigger plays and maybe one kind of community theater play. It's not something I usually do. Probably should do more of it now that I'm doing the Triangle Talk Show. I remember the Indie Week as The Independent. It was a free weekly magazine or newspaper on racks at restaurants and stores, and really just started checking it again. I haven't seen it in a long time. I had to look up the history to see that it really is what I remember as The Independent. And I'm not sure whether it's really still printed. I think it is. Just don't remember seeing it. Television news. I will usually catch the local news at 5 or 6, and sometimes just a big sweep. Cindy likes WRAL, so that's what we watch. If it was just me, I'd probably watch Channel 11, WTVD. But they're both fine. Poor old WNCN, Channel 17. They try so hard. I don't think I could tell you who the anchors or reporters are anymore. I remember like Charlie Gaddy. I don't know that I ever could. Well, some of those old guys I could. I think I read that they are all retiring and changing this year anyway, so no sense in memorizing them all now. Sometimes serious news critics say that local TV news is a joke. It's always police stories and bad traffic accidents that lead the newscasts. I don't agree with that, but local TV news is not the News and Observer for sure. Weather gets way over covered every day. I mean, they spent minutes and minutes and minutes on the weather, and they make sure that they tell you the temperature in 50 different little towns when there's only 1 or 2 degrees separating them. It's interesting when there's a front going through, and up in Roxborough it's 52, and in Fayetteville it's 95. That could be interesting. But here, every little town, I'm sure that they do it because it makes you feel good if your little town gets mentioned in the news on the weather. Spend more time on it than they need to. For my weather, I look at the app on my phone, check what the high is going to be, whether it's going to be raining. I might look at the 10-day, realizing that after 3 days, it's a joke. And then I know what I need to know. We love the weather, though. Hurricane coverage. Wow. We do love that here. We didn't have them when I grew up, where I grew up, Chicago. We did have a weatherman who did handstands. Okay, he did it once. His name was John Coleman. He co-founded the Weather Channel, and he was on Good Morning America for a while. I can't find any online reference to him doing a handstand on the air, but I'm pretty sure I remember that he did it. He was kind of a clown, and it was a big deal at the time. So he was my weather hero. Okay, yes, I watch Greg Fishel when there's a hurricane coming. All day long, or any of the others. I also usually watch the network news at 6:30. It's always going to be on NBC on WRAL. When NBC was on WNCN, I would change the channel and go watch it there. Why, I hear you ask, as my potential podcast employer? Well, I used to work for NBC. So there's your corporate loyalty. It was less than 2 years, but a year and a half, around 1980 in Chicago. And I really miss Tom Brokaw. Now, I don't know whether to give him the benefit of the doubt or not with the sexual misconduct allegations against him. I don't know. Hurts me. I didn't know him. I never met him. Just liked his style. I did, working at the NBC station in Chicago, I did work on a show that Phil Donahue did for the Today Show. They would record mini versions of the hour-long syndicated show that Donahue did. And he did that at a different TV station. So they had worked a deal, because he was real popular back then, they worked a deal where he would do mini versions of the syndicated show. And he would record them at the station I worked at. They'd usually run 15 to 20 minutes, and they would do the week's worth, usually in one day, sometimes 2 days. So they'd record 15 to 20 minutes, but they had to be edited down to 12 minutes. And I was the video editor who did that. I worked along with a producer and a director. And Brokaw was the Today Show anchor back then. And I got my name in the credits. Right next to his. Okay, not right next to it. The same credit roll. They didn't do the credit roll every day. Maybe once a week, maybe once a month. That YouTube TV thing, it's really handy for catching the news a little late. So, if I'm going to watch the 6 o'clock, I try to come into it at about 6:15 and skip the commercials. Sorry, Mark Jacobson. At least I know your name. All right, we now conclude my podcast day. Not this show, no. Just going to review the rest of the podcasts that I do. I got a ton of casts in my playlist. I don't get a chance to listen to most of them, not every day. But I do try hard to catch On the Media, which is a weekly NPR show, but they put it out as a podcast. And they also put out a weekly podcast extra that doesn't get broadcast. Marketplace and Marketplace Tech, 2 more NPR shows that go out as podcasts as well. So, once again, you listen to them on your schedule, not theirs, not WUNC's. Make Me Smart is a real podcast, and it is done by the Marketplace anchors Kai Risdall and Molly Wood. That's fairly new. They started it last year. And Molly Wood, sorry, I'm real phlegmy tonight. Molly Wood has been a podcaster or online type person for most of her career. Kai Risdall has been a regular broadcaster. So she is really good at the podcast thing, and she is loosening him up a lot. It's fun to listen to. He's pretty straightforward on the regular Marketplace show, but when he does the podcast with her, he's learning how to have fun. The Domecast is a weekly podcast from the News and Observer. It's all mostly political news because that's what the Dome, Under the Dome column covers every day. And that comes out about once a week, and I try to listen to that. Reliable Sources, a CNN TV show in podcast form, and they've also got a podcast extra every week. A show called Stay Tuned with Preet. Stay Tuned with Preet. It's a weekly podcast by the former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Preet Bharara. He's the guy that Trump patted him on the back and said, you can keep your job. And then he fired him. And then he fired all the U.S. attorneys. So Preet is calm. I like calm. He is super smart, kind of humorous, got a good sense of humor. At first, he answers, the first part of the show, he answers listeners' questions. They're mostly about the law, and also mostly about stuff that has been lifted from current headlines. And then he interviews one guest. He's got the juice to get some big-name guests, and he's a pretty good interviewer. Next show, Slow Burn. Slow Burn comes from the online magazine Slate. They started last year with a series about Watergate. And I was in my early 20s when Watergate was happening. What I remember is nothing. I remember not really paying attention. There was a lot of stuff going on in my life back then. Getting married and having trouble being married and getting a new job, just getting started in television. So I really didn't understand what was happening until the fifth or sixth time that I watched All the President's Men. I'm pretty sure I read it as a book too. Hard for me to follow. And that's why I'm trying to pay attention now to what's happening with Trump and the rest of the stuff going on in government. I mean, the parallels are pretty obvious, including that Trump and his supporters are trying to deny that anything has happened. You know, nothing to see here. It's all just a witch hunt. Slow Burn. So Slow Burn did the Watergate thing, and it included a lot of things that you wouldn't have picked up from All the President's Men. And you can go get the whole series now, and I recommend going to listen to it because it's pretty fascinating. They're going to have a season 2. I'm not sure when that's going to start, probably later this year. It will be on the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And spoiler alert, Clinton was impeached. Oh, you thought he wasn't, right? Because he stayed president. Well, impeachment is essentially an indictment. It's a finding by the U.S. House of Representatives that they believe the president did something wrong. It's kind of like them acting as a grand jury, saying, we've seen enough evidence that we are going to recommend you for trial. It's not the place where people get convicted. It is where a prosecutor will bring his evidence in and convince the grand jury that someone is looking pretty guilty. Let's go to trial and find out. Okay, so the impeachment is the indictment. It's a finding by the House that they believe the president did something wrong. The House voted to impeach Clinton on 2 charges, obstruction of justice and perjury. And they both come from the Paula Jones sexual harassment lawsuit. That was a big deal then. That's where he was saying, I did not have sex with that woman. And you did. To be removed from office, a president then has to be convicted. That happens in the Senate. It requires a 2/3 vote. 2/3 vote. 67 senators voting guilty. Well, only 50 senators voted to convict Clinton on the obstruction of justice charge, and only 45 voted to remove him on the perjury charge. So Clinton was impeached, and then he was acquitted. Back then, Republicans controlled the Senate. There were 55 Republican senators at the time, so 5 of them voted to acquit. No Democrats voted to convict on either charge. And remember, one of those charges was obstruction of justice. And that's interesting because Trump's former personal lawyer, John Dowd, had tried to make the claim that a president can't be charged with obstruction. Well, Nixon tried to make a similar claim, but that's one of the things that the House impeached Clinton on, obstruction of justice. Well, Trump's current TV lawyer, that's his words, not mine, Rudy Giuliani, concedes that, the president can be impeached based on obstruction of justice. So we'll see. Let me deviate from script for just a moment and note that as you're consuming the news, listening to this podcast, there's a lot of detail. Every day there's a lot of stuff going on. And it's hard for me to keep up with. I'm not sure where you are in the keeping up department. Some of you would love it and just absorb it like crazy, but a lot of you will say, nah, there's way too much going on. You don't have to remember all those details. Once in a while, there's actually a resolution to something. Something actually happens that where you can say, okay, everything led up to this point. Let's review that because somebody got convicted or somebody got found not guilty. Somebody quit. You don't have to pay attention to all the details. Somebody out there is, and the cable news shows love to go through them every day. It's great fodder for them, and they've got a big audience of people watching that they didn't used to have before. But it's way too much for most of us. Okay, so while we're waiting for the next season of Slow Burn, there's an almost as good podcast called Make No Law, the First Amendment podcast. And this one comes out once a month. It is stories that usually involve court cases and usually involving the First Amendment. I'm a big fan of the First Amendment. So if you discover that you liked Slow Burn, or maybe if you go find it now and you get through the episodes pretty quickly and you want something else and they haven't started up again, go look for Make No Law, the First Amendment podcast. I'll try to put a link to all these in, but you can just look these names up and you'll find them in your podcast app. I'll usually listen to a show called Off Message. It's a political show from Politico, a little bit left-leaning, but one of the more balanced. It's kind of hard to not use the words fair and balanced. One of the more balanced programs where you'll get an idea of what really happened in whatever it is they're covering. Another show that I listen to now and then, the Brad and Britt Show, and now we're pretty local. Everything else so far has been national podcasts. Do you guys remember Brad Krantz and Britt Whitmire? Have you heard of them? I first heard them on the old WZTK 101.1 FM back in the 90s. The station was in Burlington, so their signal covered the Triad and the Triangle from there. The transmitter is probably up on Cane Mountain. And Brad and Britt did a morning show there. The station has changed format a long time ago. I think it's Spanish language now. They ended up on WBT in Charlotte for a while. They had a bad falling out from there when they got fired. They even ended up on WPTF's other WPTF station. It's on 850 on your AM radio dial for a very short time. How many of you remember when 850 was WKIX and it was the Triangle's rock and roll station? That was way before my time here. I mean, not before my time on the planet, but I was in Chicago. So Cindy listened to the rock and roll. Rick Dees and some famous people came out of there. Now Brad and Britt do a podcast. It is a broadcast on Facebook Live at 10 a.m. Let's take a picture up here for a second. That's their Facebook site. But if you go to their Facebook page, you won't get the broadcast. They broadcast the show about 10 o'clock, and they put it on Facebook Live with a video that is crappier than mine. And then they'll talk for not quite an hour, and then they'll release it later on as a audio podcast. And they can be fun to listen to. It can be kind of intense. It's what I call all Trump bashing, almost for the whole hour, almost all Trump bashing. It can get a little intense unless you really like nonstop Trump bashing. And And if you want, tune in at 10 or look on Facebook afterwards, and you can see what they're doing. It's pretty low tech. I'm showing the picture of them on their Facebook picture, and this is my studio, and this is theirs, and this is what they sound like, I think.
Yeah.
Ready?
Ready.
It is the Brad and Britt cast. At the end of the week, Satan joins us for a quick session to explain just how he has his hand in everything that happens all week long, including cancellation of nuclear talks between the United States and North Korea.
I wanted that to happen.
Really? You really wanted that?
Yeah, I could blow shit up in Singapore and make things pretty bad. I could really.
Okay, thanks, Britt. We just pushed the explicit button. Yeah, shit, I don't know. Don't have to, but I still might. So they used to have their, I think they're just recording with a phone, and they used to have it flipped up into the portrait mode, and you could see that they got their shoes off. They're sitting at a card table, and in stocking feet. And on Friday, Britt does his Satan impression with a little technique like this.
I can do it. I can make myself sound like Britt doing Satan. It's a special effect that's part of the mixer here. Let me show you. There's the special effect button. When I turn it down,
I will stop being a special effect. I got to not do that very much, because after I've done my voice like that, I don't like what I sound like with the normal voice. Okay, so Brad and Britt. Another podcast that I will often consume is, this is this group called Crooked Media. They stole their name from Trump, calling all media crooked media. So they're kind of laughing back at him. Speaking of almost continuous Trump bashing, Crooked Media it's a network of shows, sort of. It started by several Obama administration and the Hillary Clinton campaign staffers and speechwriters, and they have a very good time bashing Trump and everything right wing. It's actually kind of fun to hear that kind of glee out of people that pretty much took a beating in the 2016 election. Now, I get a little tired that they're playing the same note over and over again, but I still listen now and then. Not every show. I listened this morning when I was in the shower. I got started with podcasting. Actually, I literally got started with podcasting and got started knowing that podcasts exist, listening to a tech-based network called Twit, This Week in Tech. And they had a bunch of shows. I would listen to one on Windows computers, Microsoft, one on Apple, one on Google, and their Google show tended to be all things internet, covered Facebook and Twitter. And they do sort of a flagship show called This Week in Tech on Sunday night, 6 o'clock Eastern or so. And that is where I discovered what podcasting was. It was back in 2011, and got recruited to do a ham radio show that was on that network. Then I started doing my own ham radio show because I got kicked off of that ham radio show. Still like the network, though. And I still try to listen to those shows. They're long. If you think my shows are long, their average show's 2 hours. It's hard to fit them in, but I try. Most of the Windows, the Apple, the Microsoft, the Google show, they're once a week, so can sort of fit them in. There's several good locally produced podcasts from folks here around the Triangle. They're in that meetup group that I've talked about. Several of them have been on previous Triangle Talk Show episodes. I'm going to try to recruit more of them to show up now and then here on this show. Most of them are doing national shows, not local flavors. A few of them are local flavored. And the folks are pretty good. And I listen to as many of them as I can. And again, I'll bring them on this show as much as I can. Finally, in terms of news gathering or aggregating, like you probably, I see a lot of stuff from Google Now and the new Google News app on my phone. I get notifications from the Associated Press and from the local TV stations. These are usually one-time stories that I might follow from their headline. They come from places like the New York Times and the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Reuters, The Hill, Fox News, The Guardian, Axios. What is Axios? It's a lot of places that have become big time in news I never heard of until recently. And there's some other sources that I've really never heard of, and they are often ad-filled tabloidy trash. So I try to catch them and stay away from them. Almost get nothing from Facebook or Twitter. Almost no news from these sources. Once in a while, somebody will link to a story on Facebook, and I'll check it out. I never follow the news on Facebook. I'm not even sure where I'd see it. I think it's off to the right somewhere, and just my vision never sees it. I rarely look at Twitter at all. I used to use it to promote the Old Ham Radio Show. I probably should use it for this show. And I'm going to talk more about Facebook in a couple of minutes, like those fake Russian ads, so stay tuned for that. I've never even looked at Instagram. I should. All the social media folks tell me I should use all those tools. So maybe. So if it seems, potential podcast employer, if it seems like I should be really well informed from all that media absorbing, well, here's the thing. It just kind of washes over me. I absorb a little, especially if it gets repeated enough. It forms a general impression, but I'm not one of those guys who can remember all the details and cite all the sources this stuff comes from. If I'm going to do some research, I've got to sit at the computer and do the research. Write stuff, copy and paste, put things into lists. When I was thinking about doing this show, well, two things. One, I thought maybe I could develop some discipline in my daily schedule and pay more attention to the news and events, make those notes, check some details, prep for a show. And, right. And two, I knew that one little podcast, even a long one, a couple times a week, wasn't going to cover everything. There's no way to do that. How could it? The 24-hour news networks don't even try to do that. They do hammer on a few stories all day long, but they ignore others. And maybe you can get almost everything from continuous browsing on the Associated Press website, and maybe add in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and the News and Observer and local TV stations for local stuff. If you spend all day doing that, we're not going to make a show that covers everything. Interesting. I was going to call this this episode something different, and when I made my notes, I just noticed that when I made my notes, I went back and referred to that. So now I have to tell you what I was going to call this show. Originally, I was going to call it Witch Hunt. And I was going to spell witch, W-H-I-C-H. You know, it was unfortunately a very visual joke, and only the people on the video were going to get it because I was going to have that title up. People listening to the audio version might have seen it in a title on their podcast app or something. So, yeah, that was too clever by half, and it was going to be called Witch Hunt. And then I was going to tell you that it was like clickbait. And then I was going to tell you that I have a clickbait alert if I ever happen to do a clickbait title on something. I used to do this on the Ham Radio Show now and then. So if you hear this, and if you're watching, if you see this, then you will know that I consider the title that I come up with for a show to be clickbait. Okay, yeah, yippee. So now I'm stuck because my notes go back to Witch Hunt, W-H-I-C-H. It referred to the hunt for news. I'm saying it probably should have been called What Hunt? like what part of the news to cover in any given episode. But what hunt wouldn't be clickbaity? It'd be hard to understand. So, as long as the headline is not going to be informative, at least it can be clever. A little. And anyway, I don't have an answer to the hunt yet. We're not going to report the news. My goal is to bring a bunch of local people to the show, and we'll pick through stories that we want to talk about, stories that other media, national and local, stories that they are reporting. And you, the audience, listen to what some people around this area think about those stories that are maybe washing over all of us every day. In theory, without yelling about it. but maybe in several little boxes on the TV screen. So don't watch the video, just listen to the podcast. I have a secret agenda. I actually want to reach a more disengaged audience. I think that most media outlets want to reach the engaged audience, people that are really going to tune in. I want to find the folks who don't want to absorb the news every day. People who don't want to follow the details of politics every day. People who, when it's time to vote, and I think that may be the key thing here. People who, when it's time to vote, aren't sure who to vote for. So maybe they're susceptible to political commercials, especially the negative ones. They're susceptible to the October surprise, something that has been going for a couple of years with policies and actions of the government, and then, boom, something happens in October and upsets everything, and that's all everyone ever pays attention to. And you vote based on that. Or maybe just the last wave of whatever the politicians and the media are running around in circles shouting about for the 6 weeks before the election. You do that instead of having a basic set of values, your own view of how you like the city, the county, the state, the country to run, and choosing a candidate who is most likely and most able to move government in that direction. There's a name for people like that. The undecided voter. They're not anyone's base. The bases, they're pretty reliable. Politicians do have to keep playing to them. Trump does that. And I don't know what adjective I want to use here. I'll just say he does that. Plays to the base. But the base usually isn't enough to get someone elected. Well, there are not enough of them to give you the majority of the vote. So each politician still needs to sway the undecided vote. Are undecided voters stupid? Well, it's easy to go out on the street with a mic and a camera and make somebody look dumb by stumping them with basic civics questions. Like, who's your congressman? Who's your senator? Who's your mayor? Who was the second president of the United States? And I can't answer that last one off the top of my head. I looked it up. It was John Adams. I will forget that in 5 minutes. If I didn't have the script to go by, I couldn't have told you that just now. Maybe some undecided voters are technically stupid or ignorant, but mostly this just isn't what's important to them. And it's not a binary thing. It's not like you're engaged or you're not. There are people who are way more engaged than I am. People who can get all this stuff and spit it back and make arguments I would never be able to refute, even though they're wrong. There's people who are less engaged, but still know a lot about what's going on. It's kind of, you could draw it on a curve. I'd say the truly disengaged, the truly undecided, they're closer to one end. And if I am lucky, and maybe if I'm good enough, I'll gain an audience that includes some of the disengaged people by being entertaining enough and bringing them along for the ride. I'll tell you what I think. I'll have guests who will tell you what they think. You probably already know what you think. What's missing is the connection to one specific act. Who to vote for. Not going to tell you who. I'm going to tell you what I think. have one other secret agenda, and that is to keep the momentum that was generated by the Women's March the day after the Trump inauguration, to keep that momentum going. I do think that Donald Trump is a bad president. I think he's taking the country in the wrong direction. I like that he was willing, eager even, to break the mold of the stuffy politician. I would say the slimy politician, but I actually kind of think he's perfected that. But I think that he quickly turned that apparent candor and populism in a corrupt direction. He uses it to push the country in directions that I don't want it to go to. A little later in this episode, how are we doing? We're at 50 minutes or so. Maybe next episode if this gets too big. I'm going to take a litmus test of some of the perennial hot button issues to tell you what I think about them. It's kind of like vetting a Supreme Court candidate. See how I stand. Okay, here's a taste. The NFL national anthem issue. You know, the NFL announced a new policy, take effect, I guess, when they start playing football again. This is a good time to announce it because they won't have to worry about actually doing it yet. Players on the field must stand during the national anthem. If a player doesn't want to stand, if he wants to kneel, he can stay in the locker room. If a player violates the policy, the team owner will be fined, not the player. Now, Trump doesn't even like the locker room option, and he tweeted that players who don't want to do this, who don't want to stand and respect the flag and the country during the national anthem, could just leave the country. Okay, my take. I hope this will cause more players to take a knee, because real respect is earned. It can't be coerced. Forced respect isn't any kind of respect. It's just bending someone to your will, bending someone's behavior to your will. It doesn't change their mind. It reminds me of totalitarian governments' tactics to keep their populations in line. And by the way, the Pledge of Allegiance reminds me of the same thing. I don't understand why the right wing doesn't get that their enforced patriotism is just what the communist and Nazi governments did. It's just what they did. I think I understand what the protest is about, the take a knee protest, but just to be sure, I looked it up. It's not about not showing respect for a country that oppresses. No, let me try this again. It's about not showing respect for a country that oppresses people of color. But I don't like doing a script. It is about not showing respect for a country that oppresses people of color. Specifically, police violence against black people. That's something that was getting a lot of news coverage when Colin Kaepernick started doing it a couple years ago. And it's about general inequality that has been going on forever. And Trump created an additional element when he said owners should fire protesting players. So I think they're protesting Trump too. And when people say that that kind of a protest doesn't belong at a football game, what I hear, the message I get, the coded message that I get is that they just don't agree with the protest. Does anyone who does agree with this protest or the underlying causes, does anyone like that say it doesn't belong in the game? I mean, maybe somebody does. You don't hear that a lot, though. I think that the opponents of the protest are afraid that it's effective. Now, here are some reasons why I think it's a very good protest. Seen by millions of people. It is well known. It doesn't take any extra time. It doesn't make any noise, any acoustic noise. You don't have to pay attention to it. You don't hear it, and you don't have to watch it. It doesn't disrupt the ongoing activity. The anthem plays on. Nobody rushes and sacks the singer. People who want to show what they consider to be patriotism get to do it. I can do that line better because I put some quotes in there. People who want to show what they consider to be patriotism, standing up, hand over the heart, take their hat off. They get to do that. No one is stopping them. But it makes people mad. So it's working. What would be a problem? Well, pretty much the opposite of each point above. Delaying the game, making noise, disrupting other people's expression of patriotism. Could the current protest become disruptive? Well, attempting to force players to not exercise that protest could do it. Trying to physically remove them from the field. Now, the NFL is saying it's against our rule now, and we will fine the team, fine the owners of the team that does it. That's not going to make things more disruptive. But if they decided that they would send, what's the best expression? The goon squad out onto the field to try to remove the football players who are doing it, well, first of all, good luck with that. And yeah, that could make things pretty disruptive. Could the protest itself escalate? Well, a recent story in the USA Today said, and I will quote, "From the American Revolution through the Civil Rights era, and more recently the Black Lives Matter movement, history has shown that when one avenue of protest is taken away, activists often move on to other, sometimes more disruptive methods of protest." So the implication here is if the players were left to protest by kneeling, just leave them alone, let them do it. That's all that would happen. It might keep happening, but that's all that would happen. If the social cause didn't improve, the things that they are protesting about, and I don't know that it is improving, well, they might escalate it anyway. But they weren't left alone. So we'll never know. This is not a freedom of speech issue. You won't find it in that First Amendment podcast. It's not a First Amendment issue. The First Amendment prohibits the government from restricting speech. The NFL is not the government. Surprise, right? Players can quit. They can be fired, subject to some union rules. Here's a quote. "This is a contracts question, not a constitutional question." And that's a quote from Jessica Levinson. She's a law professor at Loyola Law School. And it was in an article on the Vox.com website. And, well, a contract issue is more than I want to get into here. Many commentators are saying that the NFL will do whatever makes them the most or loses them the least money. It's all about money. All right, going to move on. So whether you are engaged or disengaged, you probably use Facebook, maybe Twitter. And the theory is that your vote in 2016 could have been influenced by fake news and fake ads posted by real Russian hackers. And I think that's pretty well been determined. Sort of. Let's talk about Twitter first. Twitter plans on unveiling new political ad restrictions. This is a story, pretty much going to read it straight from last Friday's News and Observer, but it says originally from the New York Times. Nellie Bowles and Shira Frankel were the writers. Two cats over there going nuts on a chair. Can a camera see them? Not anymore. I think you're going to hear them, though. Okay, here's the story from the News and Observer and the New York Times. Twitter said last week Thursday, that it would increase transparency of political campaign ads, a change aimed at preventing foreign manipulation of the coming midterm elections. The company said that it planned to restrict who could run political ads on its service, requiring those running political ads for federal elections to identify themselves and certify that they are in the United States. Foreign nationals will not be able to target political ads at people in the U.S., Twitter said. Still quoting, the social network will also start giving prominent visual clues, including a badge and a disclaimer to campaign ads. Accounts used for political campaigning must have a profile photo and other markers consistent with those of the campaign they're associated with, and any advertiser's Twitter biography must include a website that gives valid contact information. Candidates and political committees will be required to provide their identification number from the Federal Election Commission. Those who are not registered with the FEC must submit a notarized form. And enforcement of this policy will begin this summer. Okay. Another story, Facebook has already started doing this, and more from the New York Times. Facebook said Thursday that they would begin including a paid-for label at the top of any political ads in the U.S. And clicking on that label will take people to a page where they can view the cost of the ad and the demographic breakdown of the audience that viewed the ad. And stop quoting for a moment. You can see all of the ads that Facebook is running if you have a Facebook account, and you can see them at a website that is facebook.com/political content ads. And that last three words is all squished together like one. facebook.com/political content ads. And if you are looking at the video, when you go there, you get a search box. And if you're not looking at the video, when you go there, you get a big old-fashioned looking search box. It says search ads with political content that have appeared on Facebook or Instagram. And there's the box with the little magnifying glass icon. And so when I came across that, I was wondering, well, what am I going to search for? I suppose I could search for the name of local politicians, someone I'm interested in, see if they've put up an ad. But if I want to do sort of more general research and just see what the heck is out there, then is there like a wild card? I don't know if you know computers, you know that just typing in a little star in a search query would be like a wild card and say, give me back anything. So put a little star there, and didn't get anything. No ads matching star. So I tried, how about the word all? A-L-L, enter, and 5,600 results, page 1 out of 186 pages. I think that's the way this is working. So there's a ton of ads that have already appeared. Thousands of them. Which, gives you another problem. If you're just going to do some general perusing, then you're going to see a lot of ads. And none of them apparently by Russian bots. So if you want to do some research, you can go there. And let's see. There's one here for vote yes on Proposition 68 in California, among thousands of others. Facebook says that these ads probably won't be in your timeline because they're targeted at other people. But up until now, you haven't been able to see them at all, no matter what. Couldn't get an idea of how things were being swayed by advertising because you couldn't see them at all. Now you can, and you can be caught in an avalanche of them. New York Times again, in addition to working with independent fact-checking teams, Facebook said this week, they will start a news literacy campaign to help teach the American public, you out there, unwashed American public, how to spot disinformation. Okay. We go to media school. Media literacy is something a lot of people in the media think that we can all benefit from. I don't remember seeing any of those ads. I was doing Facebook in, the 2016 election. I don't remember seeing any of that stuff. Do you? Don't know. Did you believe any of it? Were you influenced by any of it? I kind of wondered about the fake Russian ads, and Facebook released them to the Senate earlier this year. These are the ads I don't remember seeing. They were also highly targeted, so that, it's maybe why I didn't see them. The Senate has put them online. Some senators have anyway. And what you get is a huge bunch of PDF files. Each PDF of a separate ad. They have the text, they've got some metadata about the ad, and they've got a picture of how it looked. I've got a couple of examples here. Let's see. I'm going to have to move my title. Here's how I get rid of the title. Go down here and go click, and it's gone. Okay, we're back. The text of one ad says, 10 years later, no changes. Hundreds of Americans have held demonstrations in San Francisco to protest police fatal shooting of Mario Woods last month. Click to learn more. Cop block us, American cops. And it led to an Instagram page that has been removed. It was targeting San Francisco, 40 kilometers in California, targeting ages 13 to 35, English language. There were 31,500 impressions of the ad. 149 people of those clicked on it. So 31,506 saw it scroll by on their computer screen or their phone. Only 149 clicked on it. They spent 6,915 rubles, or about $110, to reach those 149 people. That's not very efficient. That was back from May 2016. And if you're looking at the picture, I'm going to show you the video. I'll show you what it actually looked like were you to have seen it on your Facebook page. Okay, here's another one. The ad text said, USA Muslims United. And it was followed by some Arabic text. And it led to a page on Facebook for Muslim America. It's also gone. Targeted the U.S. There were some exclusions that in the targeting that they specified to Facebook. It excluded people who liked United Muslims of America. Looked for 18 to 45, English or Arabic speakers. It was placed in news feeds and mobile devices. There were some names that it was to match the interests of. It got no impressions, no ad clicks, and they didn't spend any money on it. Why it got tossed out at us, I don't know. But it looked, again, if you're looking at the video, it looked like this. You didn't see it because it got no impressions. Okay, here's one that got a few. Our heart goes out to the Montgomery family. Andre Montgomery, grandson of Robbie Montgomery, owner of Sweetie Pie's Restaurants, was shot and killed on Monday night. Condolence to the Montgomery family. His picture was shown there. It got 25 reactions, 3 comments, 11 shares. I mean, it just looks like a nice remembrance of someone, but it was put up by the Russians. Why? Here's one that is a little more political. LGBT United. It looks like it's from an LGBT group. And the picture on it has two guys kissing. Every time you share this picture, a homophobic bastard unfriends you. And there's some other text that's a little bit too small for me to read. Okay, once again, put up by Russians, not an LGBT group. So I just looked at a very few of them. I didn't see any specific references to Clinton or Trump, but there are thousands and thousands. They're all created, paid for, posted by Russian hackers or Russian bots. The predominant theory that I hear is that it is the goal is the disruption of American society, not specifically electing Trump or Clinton. Did they succeed? Have they stopped? Okay. Moving on. A technology public service. The FBI says, reboot your routers right now. Well, if you're watching on YouTube rather, don't do it right now. Wait till I'm done. But if you got a router, and just about everybody does, go reboot it. The deal is that some bad guys have been able to put malware into some routers. I'm looking at a story that's actually in Popular Mechanics. So to say who the bad guys are, I'm not seeing it immediately. But foreign cyber actors have compromised hundreds of thousands of home and office routers and other network devices worldwide. So the advice is to reboot your router, unplug it, wait 30 seconds, plug it back in. They put some code into the router that is actually persistent code, designed so that if you did reboot your router, that code would cause the router to go out to a specific website and reload the malware, go get the malware back. What the purpose of it is, I'm not really sure, but it's to do something bad. You make a bot army of some kind. And so in theory, rebooting the router wouldn't help, wouldn't do any good, except that the FBI was able to trace where the routers were going to pick up their malware load again once they've been rebooted and take over those sites and get rid of the malware. So if you reboot your router, it could go look for the malware again, but it's not going to find it. So that's why rebooting could make it work. Reboot your router. Just unplug it, plug it back in. So how long will it take me to do this litmus test? I think I'll do it. It's probably going to run us up to about the 90-minute point. Typical from one of my shows. I want to claim political center-left status. I think I may be a little bit more lefty than I'm aware, if that makes any sense. I mean, how could I be more lefty than I think I am? If I think I'm center-left. Well, this is not going to be a complete litmus test. I've only got a couple of questions in here. The kind of thing that they drag a Supreme Court nominee through when they're trying to claim impartiality. Somebody is being vetted for Supreme Court, or going through the Senate confirmation hearings, and I'll only decide things based on the law, and I'll be impartial. Blah blah blah. Judges at all levels are saying that, and then they vote consistently with one political side or the other, and then they try to fool us at each new set of nomination hearings. We fall for it. The media does every time. Well, I did the NFL thing earlier. What's a good hot button? How about abortion? The Republic of Ireland just repealed their constitutional ban on abortion. It had said that the mother and the unborn fetus had equal rights, but then it sided completely with the fetus on the question of abortion. My take is that the situation between a pregnant woman and her unborn child is that it is rights in conflict. I never heard anyone else describe it quite that way. Probably someone has. I just haven't come across it. Okay, let me do a little quick Google search. I'm not going to do that. You can if you want. Rights in conflict. A woman has the right to control her own body. And I'm going to make a point here. I'm speaking as a man who has a really weak position in saying anything about this. Really weak. Maybe none at all. A woman has the right to control her own body. It's not a right I give her. It's a right she's got. At some point, an unborn child has a right to live. If a woman wants an abortion and the unborn child has a right to live, well, those are two rights in conflict. The unborn child's right gets stronger. It develops as the child does. That's the term is viability, the ability of the child to live on its own at some point early, probably with medical help. I don't know exactly when that is. I do know medical technology keeps making it earlier. Some folks on the far right still want to totally ban abortion, even though Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court has said that abortion is legal under certain circumstances, certain fairly liberal ones when it's early on, pretty much on demand of the mother. There are still some folks on the far right that would want to totally ban it, but the more common tactics are just to make it harder to get one. So I think that abortion should be cheap, safe, legal, and available. But what about that cutoff point? It's a Solomon question I can't answer. My thinking is that if the strident anti-abortionists somehow just disappeared, I think the issue would also just disappear. Women would mostly want to have abortions early. Late-term abortions would mostly be a health issue. So, the idea that by the time a fetus or an unborn child has gained enough rights that they may override a mother's choice is she's already made that choice, hopefully a long time ago. And we rarely reach that point. And when we do, it's a case of the health of the mother, of the child, and not just a question of the woman's. What word do I want to use here? Whim is not really the word. There are probably a few women out there that just consider abortion to be another form of birth control. That's probably too bad, but I don't want to tell them they can't do that. Gay rights. Oh, this is a good one. Like Obama, my position has evolved. I probably spent a lot of my life vaguely uncomfortable. Okay, I will use the word disgusted by homosexuality. All I saw growing up were the stereotypes, the flamboyant demonstrations, the excesses of sexuality, or the whispered, bigoted comments by my peer group, or sometimes not so whispered. I actually knew one gay man when I was a teen. I mean, one person that I knew was gay, but he was in the closet about it. We really didn't talk about it. He did come on to me once, and I awkwardly rejected him at that time, but we remained friends. We didn't talk about it for decades. He never tried it again. As I approached 30, I knew a few more gay people, openly gay this time. I got a little more comfortable with the idea. You know, I'm not religious, so the sin aspect, the Bible references were never an issue for me. And if it's an issue for you, if the Bible stuff, it's an abomination according to the Bible, that's just for you. You don't get to tell everybody else how to behave based on your interpretation of the Bible. What does seem to be a factor that I don't hear very many people talk about is what I'm going to call the ew factor. I mean, the idea of having sex with a man makes me feel Ew. I don't want to do that. I suspect it's at the root of most homophobia. The ew factor. But nobody says that. Well, in the media, a couple decades ago, they began showing the real lives of real and on-screen LGBT, etc. Those initials go on for a while. The letters go on for a couple more letters at least. The media started showing them as real people. And I finally realized that we need to expand the definition of normal. Straight people don't get to own the word normal anymore. Well, they never did. They stole it. Nobody chooses their gender and sexual preference. You don't think so? Ask any straight person when they chose to be straight. Ask them to tell you the year that happened and how they came about to make that decision. Should I be gay? Should I be straight? Do I want to change genders? It's not a decision you make. It is something you discover. But you don't say, one or the other, 50-50, flip a coin. When I was growing up, our society tried to keep a very tight lid on sexuality. I think the pressure from that caused a lot of leaks at the seams. Are we doing better today? Well, we're less puritanical, but I'm not sure we've learned anything. So LGBT, etc., marriage? Absolutely. Adoption? Yes. Military? Yes. Bathrooms? Wherever you feel comfortable. Close the door. I did think for a while about the cake issue. And the Supreme Court is going to have a ruling on that any day now. Initially, I sympathized with a baker, a florist, a videographer, to get it a little closer to home for me. Any of those people who had a strong personal objection to marrying gays, I felt some sympathy for those folks being required to provide a service. But then I tried to make the statement a little broader to people who had a strong personal objection to a whole class of people. Not just gay people, but I don't want to serve you because I have an objection to your whole class of people, whatever that is. And it got harder to justify. It got very uncomfortable to justify. And then I made the statement very specific again. I have a strong personal objection to providing service to blacks, Asians, Italians. All justification vanishes. I think the discomfort that even a liberal might feel comes from the justice that the LGBT community has finally gotten, and still only partially. It's new. It's just happened past couple of years. We're not used to it yet. We'll get used to it. So I find myself wanting to say, why would a gay couple even want a cake or a flower arrangement or a video made by someone who what? Has a moral objection to your lifestyle? We'll get over that too. We all have moral objections to various lifestyles. And if we're in the business of serving the public, we accommodate it. More or less. I'm going to go with something a little stronger. I'm going to say, why would we want to have someone provide us a service who despises you, who hates your guts? Okay, once again, plug in black, Asian, Italian. And, there's still a lot of that going on out there. There's a lot of gut hating going on, but we mostly are still doing business with each other. We certainly don't get to get up and hang a sign that says no blacks, no Asians, no Italians. Okay, Kickback Jacks is trying to spin it as a clothing policy that seems aimed at one combination of age, ethnicity, and race. But even that only catches the symbols of the culture they seem to be objecting to. Okay. So no. There's no free pass. You object to someone, broaden your thinking. Where else are you willing to apply your version of prejudice? Supreme Court, are you listening? Expect a 9-0 for this one. Sure I do. Okay. There was one other thing that I had written up here, and Evernote, where I was writing things up, did something to it. Synchronized and made it go away. I maybe spent 15 minutes writing it up. It's religion, so I'll try to wing it. I checked the none of the above box on, what religion are you? I probably grew up, I know I grew up early first decade or so Presbyterian, good Christian religion. My family went to church most Sundays. I seem to remember being a little irritated, like one more day of school. That was the weekend. Sunday school. Why am I going to school again? We stopped. I don't know if it was based on my objection, but we stopped when I was probably somewhere around 10 or 12. We moved from the Detroit area to the Chicago area, and I don't remember going to church anywhere in the Chicago area, so I'm pretty sure we'd stopped by then. And I, for the next, through my teens, didn't have a strong feeling one way or the other. Didn't pay a lot of attention to the whole thing. Probably sort of, there probably is a God. I don't know. It wasn't until I got to college that I really firmed up my belief or lack thereof. It was in an anthropology class. I took an anthropology class, a semester of cultural, a semester of physical. I did really well in college, and I did really well in that class, so well that the professor thought I might be interested in making it my career. Well, I wasn't. It just turned out that I knew how to study by then and knew how to write papers. And all that is thanks to a journalism class I had early on. It taught me how to write. Didn't know how before. So I took this anthropology class, and what I learned in it was that there are lots and lots of different cultures scattered around the planet. Almost all of them, maybe all of them, have some form of religious belief. A lot of them, one God, some of them multiple gods. And they all think they're right. And to the extent that they're aware of other religions, they think they're wrong. And that the penalties for being wrong can be pretty severe. Better pick the right one. So I was left thinking, well, first of all, how do you pick? How does anybody pick? You end up usually with the religion that you were born into, your family. A few people change from one denomination to another. A few people change religions entirely, Christian to Jewish or Muslim or some other. Some lose all their religious beliefs entirely, which is, I guess, what happened to me. So I was thinking, how does anybody choose? And with everybody saying that theirs is the right one and any others, you're going to be in pretty deep trouble. You're doomed to damnation. Wow. It's a pretty serious choice. And again, everybody's confident they've got the right one. The one and only. So I couldn't see making that choice. And I pretty much came to the conclusion that likely none of them are really right. I'm not going to say there is no overriding natural force, supernatural force. I don't know. Science constantly gives us new information about creation and evolution and the way things came to be and are continuing to come to be. We're learning more and more about that. I mean, that has just certainly been the bane of religions over the centuries, is that they made up explanations for things. Science came up with different explanations for things. Those scientists were persecuted, and eventually we capitulated and said, "No, sorry. Apparently you're right." So in my lack of belief If you are Christian or Jewish or Muslim, yes, I believe that you have latched on to fairy tales. But that's fine. They're your fairy tales. You're welcome to them. You could be right. And you could look at me and say, well, you're wrong, and you could be right about that too. I don't know, and I'm not willing to say. What I do say is that keep your hands off of my lack of religion. You're welcome to practice your religion any place you want except at the city hall. And I'm going to use city hall as sort of a stand-in for anything that's the government, schools, national, federal, state. Your religion doesn't belong there. I mean, you could pray all you want there. That's fine. If you're hauled into court, pray that you are found not guilty. That's fine. You're in school. You didn't study for the history test. You think a little divine intervention might get you at least a D. Pray all you want, but just it shouldn't be led by the government institution. If you're in private school, of course, you're all set. There's no war on Christianity. There's no war on religion. There's no war on Christmas. You're welcome to do that all you want, just not in the public square that we all share with our different beliefs. I think that's it. I mean, there's plenty more to the litmus test that I could go through, but we're at 90 minutes. Seems like a good time to stop a show and a job interview. So I don't know. Am I hired? Hopefully I'm entertaining enough, thoughtful enough, halfway smart enough. Let me know if I've got the job by tuning into the next Triangle Talk Show. Got to get back to the control program here. There we go. To turn things off. I'm Gary Pierce. Thanks for listening, and a few of you for watching. Over and out.